Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Cosmere Conversations. Welcome back, all of you fantastic people. We are immersed in Wind and Truth here on Cosmere Conversations. Last time, we were talking about the arms race, this kind of like escalating back and forth between Honor and Odium that is going to crescendo in this moment that we're going to talk about today. And
we briefly touched on this clash in our last episode, and I was kind of planning on pushing this episode a little bit later, but
we've become obsessed.
And I am fully obsessed. I've never stopped being obsessed. Like, I've been obsessed with this since I read it for the first time in Wind and Truth, and I'm not over it. I don't know when I'm going to get over it. Probably never.
It's one of the biggest mysteries that was introduced in Wind and Truth.
100%.
Not something that we had like little inklings of. For example, the Unmade. We talked a bunch about them previously. This, we had no idea it was coming. This is our fourth moon episode. We're going to be talking all about a period that, as far as we know, only takes about 50 to 100 years from this clash above the shattered planes, but before it becomes the shattered plane, so just the planes, and then the resulting generation that follows of Radiance and the Heralds that witness this, that ends in Aharietiam. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But first, we want to give a big shout out to our patrons. Last month was so much fun. We did Drunk History. We had interview episode with Melinda the Gray. You can follow them on Instagram and TikTok and stuff. We are planning future interview episodes for this month that we're really excited about, but we wanted to give a shout out to some of the patrons who joined up in April.
Thanks for joining Jared L.,
Dale H.,
Tien Soon, excellent username,
Ed E.,
and Eric S.
Thank you all so much for joining up last month. If you would like the completely chaotic Drunk History episode, you can join up at any Patreon tier. But in May, we actually have a super special surprise giveaway coming to you because of longtime patron Dorksider, who, through a series of what we're going to call very fortunate events, had received multiple copies of some artwork done by Katie Payne and has graciously volunteered to donate one of these pieces of artwork. This is an 11 by 17 print of Vin and Tensoon. Speaking of that great username, you will be entered into a patron raffle, and everyone who joins in the month of May will be entered into a raffle with everyone who's a patron, and then at the end of May, we will draw one of the names, and whoever it is, as long as we can reasonably send you this print, will be declared the winner and will be gifted for free this signed Katie Payne print of Vin and Tensoon. If you want a picture of the print before joining, that's going to be available on our Patreon, so you can check out the links in the show notes, and one of the public posts will be the actual picture. And then just join up in the month of May, or remain a patron through the month of May, and you'll be entered into a raffle. Big thank you out to Dorksider for donating this print. Thanks to Katie Payne for making stuff, and thank all of you for being listeners, and special thanks to those of you who decide to join up on Patreon.
On to the fourth moon.
As we said, this has become an obsession. It was remarkable the first time that we started to experience perspectives in Wind and Truth from Honor's view, from Tanavast's view.
Yeah, from Honor, but also Venli's perspectives played into this whole situation as well, to the point where I found myself really excited about Venli chapters and like really anticipating going back to her perspective, because I was so intrigued by what was happening on the Shattered Plains. You know, when I read my first sentence about the fourth moon, my brain just like record scratched and I could not continue reading. I just stared into the middle distance for hours, like silently screaming in my head, just like, what is happening? And I can report now that that hasn't really stopped.
And let it never stop. I don't want it to stop, because these are the great mysteries. This is the way that Brandon is like leading us along in one direction and then sends us off in another direction, but it's not a complete surprise. As you're talking about, Venli gives us so much extra information and extra perspective, the modern perspective on what's going on in the Shattered Plains. And then we have the flashbacks to Honor's perspective and the clash with Odium that creates the Shattered Plains. But it is centered around something that we talked about in maybe our first lore episode of 2025. Honor and cultivation arrive in this system, and the planets are uniquely connected between at least Roshar and Braze, and that there is this something. There is this metal, there is this moon, there is something within Roshar itself. There is this fourth moon, and there's been so much speculation about what this means and what it can be, and that's what we want to bring together. We want to bring all the evidence from Venli, from Honor's chapters, and try to connect it with other things that Brandon has been introducing recently. For example, the Secret Project, the Sunlit Man, the planet of Canticle, maybe even like the planet of Taldane, an autonomy system. I think there's a lot of fun things we can start connecting.
Yeah.
Dare I say it, maybe even Aethers.
Oh, God.
I will not say it on this episode. But if you want that crazy theory, you should join our Patreon and get Drunk History, because it goes down over there.
But we don't even have to get crazy for this to be incredible. Like, I think you are really pushing it out to the brink, but we don't even have to do that for this entire thing to be completely mind-blowing. So let's just go through the actual event where the planes are shattered. Quote, "I screamed, and in my rage I lost control and threw myself at him. He laughed and threw his power against mine. What followed was a thunderclap and silence as all was pushed away from us. In that space of nothing, every axon forced away, our souls melded in the most unnerving of ways. Too intimate, too reminiscent of creation for a creature such as him. In that moment, tiny pieces of something discordant were born, something dangerous, even to a god. The counter to my essence. Anti-light, it could be called." End quote. This continues, but let's just stop here, because already, before the planes have even been described to be shattered, we have something new, maybe, happening. Very interesting connection between Honor and Odium. And I have questions about what exactly is happening here, because anti-light, as it's described, I'm like confused about how this would be anti-light, I think. Light and anti-light are mutually destructive. So light and anti-light from the same shard are going to have a more explosive reaction than if you combined light and anti-light from different shards.
Okay,
That's the word of Brandon.
Yeah, I follow you there.
But this instance is a very different way of creating anti-light than the way that Navani is able to create anti-light.
Definitely. And that's important. I think that the way Navani discovers anti-light is not the same as the creation of anti-light in this instance. Do you want to describe her moments?
Yeah, because she does almost the opposite of this.
Exactly.
Where she isolates the light from its tone by putting the light inside of a vacuum. And then she uses intent to invert the investiture. And I do see how in this situation, and the quote that we just read, it says that there is space of nothing. Every axon is forced away. So we can say that that's a vacuum.
Yeah, great point.
But then Honor is saying that anti-light is created by the merging of Honor and Odium, seemingly. And that doesn't seem like anti-light to me. It seems like that would be warlight.
Because it is the hybrid between them. If it's merging together, then it seems like it would be warlight, which is another step, but it's very specifically not anti-light to either stormlight or voidlight.
Exactly. That's exactly Rabaniel's mistake, is thinking that by smushing them together, she's going to make anti-light, when it does not make anti-light. It makes a hybrid light, in this case, warlight. So it is strange to me, and maybe we're just not getting a really full description of what's happening. I could also see that two things are happening at the same time, that there is both a merging and then also an anti-light thing happening, but that those are separate things happening at the same time. You know, they're like correlated, but they're not causal. So I'm imagining like a Venn diagram that's overlapping. You know, one circle is Honor, one circle is Odium. There's part of them that are together, overlap, but then there's still parts of them that are separate. And these pieces of something discordant, as they're being described, are breaking off from the circles in the places where they do not overlap.
I think you've nailed it. I mean, the Venn diagram is a good visual image for description. I'm going to pretend that I know a lot more about physics for the next 98 seconds. And if you are a listener who happens to know more, correct me, because I know everybody loves to do that. So I think when you have a situation with uranium that is inside of a nuclear bomb, there is a reaction, a chain reaction that is set off as the uranium, maybe an isotope, but the uranium loses atoms and it starts to like fly off of the uranium, which then slams into anything that's around and like starts the chain reaction that ends in the explosion, or like that's the result. And I think that, yes, there might be a merging. So this is not accurate in terms of what goes on in Earth, but just like stay with me. If instead of Honor, Tenavastium, and Racium, we were just talking about like uranium and plutonium, the two things that are often used in nuclear bombs. Those two things are separate. You could theoretically like slam them together hard enough where they would merge together. But in that process, so much energy is necessary to force the two metals together that there is a resulting destruction of the metals themselves. So that's what I think you're talking about with the Venn diagram. Like the thing that is breaking off the anti-light that is being created is anti-light of Honor, anti-light of Odium, we can imagine, is also happening. And then there is separately the creation of warlight. I think that's a huge possibility because there's so much chaotic destruction that's happening that I think multiple things are going on. And as is evidence at the end of Wind and Truth, one of those things, when shards are being created and destroyed, is massive time dilation, like huge influxes of
we don't
investiture
see that
and
happening
gravity.
in this case.
Exactly. So like maybe the amplitude, the magnitude of what happens at the end of Wind and Truth is greater than what happens in this moment with the fourth moon and the destruction of the shattered planes. But it's like on the way there. And on the way there, you could get the creation of warlight, and you can also get the creation of anti-light.
So I think that I'm beginning to understand this a little bit better. I'm also noticing that this quote does not say that anti-void light is created. It only says, quote, the counter to my essence, end quote. So I'm thinking, right, because when Navani creates anti-light, she has the vacuum, but as we said before, she has to use intent in order to invert the investiture. In this situation, we have the vacuum that is made by the shards colliding, essentially. The intent comes in because Honor is acting dishonorably, perhaps, like against his directive.
Or
which
maybe
is-
there's a little bit of the honor the shard versus Tanavast the vessel. Maybe there's disagreement there.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, either way, it could be that, Tanavast is attacking Odium because of his own personal grudges against Rasa, and Honor is not fully convinced that this is the right thing to do for whatever reason. I think the intent that is happening in that moment is acting against the nature of Honor, which is why anti-Honor light, anti-storm light is created. And I think maybe anti-void light is not created in this instance because the intent of Odium is still in alignment.
That would make sense. We've talked a lot about alignment and how the vessels and the shard power needs to be aligned. In this instance, it is simply defense, and Odium shard doesn't really care about fighting or anything like that. But it's even more justifiable as they are still bound by the contract at this point. Like, Honor can attack Odium first, but Odium cannot attack Honor first.
Yes.
And so this is a little bit of bait. And it's kind of like, hey, everything worked out exactly as I planned. Now we can get on with the rest of the show, which for Odium means getting
Fighting.
off. Yeah. I want to present one more hypothetical, and it is because of a single word in this quote, which is intimate. Our souls melded in the most unnerving of ways, too intimate, too reminiscent of creation for creatures such as him, end quote. Honor and Odium are doing what is perhaps the closest thing to a sexual experience that shards get to have in the very stereotypical way.
I mean,
when people talk about like, oh, our bodies merged together and we became one, the like spiritual connection when you are aligning all parts of your physical body and your spiritual body, and everything is like working between these two people. That's what's going on in this moment with Honor and Odium, but it's in a fighting rather than a sexual circumstance. And I think that there is great intimacy when two people are fighting, whether that's something like, a sport, whether playing football or doing jujitsu or boxing, like that is very intimate. You are incredibly close with that person across from you. And the intimacy only goes up as that fighting goes out of sport and into like actual physical combat, actual like deadly combat.
I mean, the closer you get to either life or death, right? Like the more sort of intense your connection with another human that you're experiencing, again, something close to life or death is.
And so I think these two shards are basically at the pinnacle of intimacy that can be seen and experienced between them, because they are forcing their infinite powers against one another. And through that, it melds. And I think that this is my one speculative gambit about this moment. It could be that the anti-light that is created is simply anti-all investiture, not anti-stormlight or anti-void light, but anti-investiture. And that's why he says it's something that's dangerous even to a god, because it's equally dangerous to all of them. Maybe the comparison is like unkeyed Aeon door that can be used by anyone. This would be like anti-light that is dangerous to all forms of investiture.
There is anti-investiture. Like we know that for sure via word of Brandon. I don't know if that is meant generally, as in, anti-stormlight counts as anti-investiture, or if he was intentionally referring to there being like an let's just say Adonalsium investiture.
Yes, and that's basically what I'm proposing.
But I think that that's right. Like, I think that does exist. I don't know that is what's being created in this moment.
I think we only can speculate, but it, of course, doesn't end here. This is the beginning of this episode and this moment. And I want to read the next quote that we have, because this is the actual destruction of the Shattered Plains. And a reminder, for about 1,000 years, or a little over 1,000 years before this moment, there is a capital city called Stormseat that resides at the center of the Shattered Plains, and as the civilization around Stormseat is responsible for many of the ruins and like where the singers eventually show up and begin to occupy. It's all this civilization that we have seen very little of. Only some of the flashbacks that Dalinar experienced even hinted at Storm Seat. But here's what's going on there when Honor and Odium clash. Quote, worse, the shockwave of our class surged beneath us, power rushing and vibrating with those terrible tones. I realized too late that there was something strange about this land, beneath this city, pieces of something fallen. A fourth moon in splinters? It reacted to us, and I saw people there, new ones, watchers, who had been hidden from me. Those pieces of the sky, they sheltered from the eyes of God? End quote.
Every sentence there is just like, what?
Mind-blowing, mind-blowing, mind-blowing.
What? I don't know. Like, I don't have any answers. As I was taking notes for this episode, again, like I couldn't even take notes. I would put a quote into the document and then just stare into the middle distance, just like, what is happening? So let's just start with pieces of something fallen, a fourth moon. Do you think this is actually a moon that has fallen to Roshar? Do you think it's something else? What is it if it's something else? Why would it have been a fourth moon? Why did it fall? Why is it embedded in Roshar?
Yeah, I think we should break it down. So we have this label, a fourth moon. It is in splinters, or at least Honor questions if it is in splinters.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not like one single chunk,
Yeah.
but separated into several splinters underneath the city. Second point, it reacted to us. Actually, that's a very big point.
Yeah.
And then third, that he did not know that there were people at Stormseat. He did not see a civilization because the fourth moon may have sheltered these people from his eyes, the eyes of God.
Oh, is that what you think?
Yes. I'm sorry. What did you think?
I don't know. I had no thoughts.
I'm just trying to, I'm
I
breaking
thought it
this
could be
down.
anything.
Yeah. I'm just trying to break this down. I'm saying like it's in splinters. It reacted to us and it sheltered the people from the eyes of Honor.
Maybe.
Well, that's what it says,
Yeah.
right?
Well, no, it doesn't say that. You're interpreting that from what it says.
Well, he said, it reacted to us and I saw people there, new ones, watchers who had been hidden from me.
Right. That could be anything. Like Adonalsium could have put a spell specifically on the Natan people so that they would be hidden from any other god. Like
But then he
it could
says,
be a billion other things.
But the next line says, those pieces of the sky,
Right.
the fourth moon, sheltered from the eyes of God.
No, I'm reading those pieces of the sky as being the people, the Natan people, not the moon.
The Natan people are pieces of the sky
pieces
and
of the
they
sky.
are sheltered from the eyes of God.
Correct.
Okay.
That's how I'm reading it.
I guess they always recognized or knew that the fourth moon was there. No, they knew that there was something about a connection between Braze and Roshar, but not that was the fourth moon. So it's not until this moment that he recognizes there's something going on with the fourth moon.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is the first moment that any being that we know of finds out about this thing inside of Roshar.
Okay, listeners, let us know what you think about the main established points of what is the fourth moon, what does it entail. I think that the Natan people based here at Stormseat, in my estimation, are protected from being viewed by Honor.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's because of the fourth moon. I think the fourth moon was doing the protection. They like tapped into the fourth moon in some way and like put a shield up around them. And this might be supported by a word of Brandon, where Chris Hansen asked, quote, are either the blue-skinned Natan or blue-veined Babatharnums human Amian hybrids? And Brandon responds, yes.
He does not say if it's both or if it's one or the other. So to be fair,
Could be an either
we
or.
don't have solid confirmation that this is absolutely true of the Natan people. What we do know, which we talked about in a previous episode, is that the Natan people are not among the people who come from Ashen. There are several groups of people that are not present in that group, and the Natan are one of those groups. We also, of course, have the myth about the creation of the Natan people, which has to do with a human mating with or having a child with the moon.
Mm-hmm. So what if, here's my speculation, and this is a big one. What if the humans are not the only aliens who arrived on Roshar?
Right.
What
like,
if Amians
where did they come from?
Well, what if Amians are also a species that arrived on Roshar and then mated with the humans who came to Stormseat area.
I think it's completely, like, almost confirmed that Amians would be not native to Roshar.
I had thought that they arrived prior to the humans, though. And now I'm thinking maybe they arrived
came
afterwards.
after?
Yes.
Yeah.
But one way or the other, it's speculated that this civilization around Stormseat was made up of the Natan people. And I think they had a knowledge about the fourth moon. I don't know if this comes because the Amians know that they arrived and like the fourth moon is their ship or something. You know, it's pieces of their planet or their energy source.
Yeah, that was my question of like, okay, if we know the Natan people didn't come from Ashen, like where did they come from? Seemingly they're not native to Roshar because Honor doesn't mention them when he first comes to the planet, but that doesn't really mean anything because again, maybe they have some kind of magical power that hides them from the eyes of God. It's unclear to me. I would love to hear from listeners what they think those pieces of the sky are. If it's referring to the moon specifically that fell from the sky, and that is the thing that is providing shelter, or if it's referring to the Natan people. Again, if we like go to the myth that they are sort of children of the moon, then they are also in some sense pieces of the sky that, again, somehow have like magical powers that shield them.
Well, why would, let's say the myth is accurate, right? Why would they want to be shielded? Because there's other players.
Have you seen the shards?
That's what I'm saying. There's other players. There's other celestial bodies. There's other moons who are jealous and who have some skin in the game, and they might attack a species that was representing another player on Roshar.
Wait, you think the moons are actually alive? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe the moons represent the shards. We've talked about that before,
Yes.
how like the three moons that now exist are blue tinged, green tinged, and violet or purple tinged.
Yes.
And so it can say that they line up with the three existing shards.
Because there are also 10 gas giants in the system that at least are named / numbered, which those words for numbers come from the Heralds names. So they're like sort of named after the Heralds. So there does seem to be this cosmic body sort of connection to the spiritual things that are happening in the system, which then also makes me wonder, is this fourth moon like Adonalsium's moon that existed when Adonalsium was in the system, and then when Adonalsium left the system, it crashed?
Yes, I think that actually is perhaps a great theory, because Brandon has also stated that the Rosharan system is not a naturally stable celestial system.
Oh.
That it needs to be, quote unquote, held up by a godlike power. First,
that's
Adonalsium, and now we suspect Honor and Cultivation,
Right.
and maybe a little bit Odium. And that the three moons that are remaining represent a stable balance. Well, 4 moons maybe originally were around Roshar, and they were in balance because Adonalsium was doing the balancing. And then, as you said, Adonalsium leaves or Adonalsium dies, and the 4th moon is the first to fall out of an orbit. That's a speculation.
My thought would be more that like these celestial bodies are coalescing in the physical realm because of the presence of large bodies of investiture, like shards, in the spiritual realm, like in that location. That's sort of the focus of this large amount of investiture. Kind of in the same way that it makes a perpendicularity on the planet.
Sure.
When it's located in a certain place for a long time, creates this celestial body. So my guess would be that when Adonalsium was on Roshar, Roshar only had 1 moon. Adonalsium's moon.
Okay.
Adonalsium leaves, the power is no longer there infusing the system, and so the moon crashes.
Falls out of orbit,
Yeah.
yes.
When Honor and Cultivation arrive, there are no moons, and then over time, as their presence there coalesces, the 2 moons, the green one and the blue one, get created, And then when Odium shows up, the purple moon gets created. But then I think what happens now, I guess, is the question. Like, are two of the moons going to merge together, or are those moons going to fall apart and then a new moon, like Retribution's moon, gets made? I don't know. This is a kind of wild theory that has not really any basis in fact, but those are my thoughts.
Well, I think you're getting at something important, which is, again, this is not happening on a natural timeline as we humans on Earth would understand it. Moons, celestial bodies, planets, they all do run into one another. Of course,
Yeah.
suns grow and expand and like take out entire solar systems in their expansion, or black holes, all that jazz. But it's normally on the time scale of millions or billions of years. Everything about Roshar is happening on a hyper accelerated schedule where Heralds only died, in quotes, only died a few thousand years.
I mean, many
before.
thousand, but yeah.
Still, it's like it's not enough time to do anything if we are saying it's happening naturally. And that is what I think you're getting at, is that none of this is happening naturally.
Yeah.
And so does it make any sense in physics that one celestial body, a moon, would run into a planet and then new celestial bodies would be formed within a few thousand years? It does not. That's not something that would happen. It's just not enough time for gravity to do its thing and like coalesce back into moons.
Yeah.
But if it's influenced by the shards, then maybe exactly what you are saying did happen. My one like slight modification to your theory is that perhaps the destruction of the main moon, Heralds' moon, was closer to bumping up against Roshar, and then breaking into three pieces that would become
4 pieces.
No. That the bump is one piece going onto the planet.
Yeah.
And then 3 large pieces of that one moon break up and become the modern 3 moons rather than a complete...
I mean, that would be more normal.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, I could imagine that being the process, but really it's happening for the same reasons that you said, which is magical. Like it's related back to the shards. And that's how I could conceive of it. Do you have other thoughts about this like concept of the splinters and how they protect or shield the Natan people in Stormseed?
I don't have thoughts about that, but I do want to just circle back to the Natan for a moment before we move on. We've only read 2 quotes so far. Okay, the Natan. I think we still have so many questions about who they are, how they got here, and what they can do, like what their whole deal is. We basically know 0 about them. I think it's possible that they are human Amian hybrids, as we read in that Word of Brandon. Could it also be possible that they also are alien and arrived in a spaceship of some kind, and maybe the 4th moon is a spaceship?
Just like we saw on Lumar, and as we were talking about the moons being like sources or wells of shard power, on Lumar, we saw other wells of power, not of shards, but of aethers.
Yes.
And they kind of like formed moons around Lumar related to each of the specific aethers and then dropped their spores onto the planet. An Elantrian arrived with a spaceship, became the sorceress, and that spaceship was certainly like overpowered or magically powered compared to the people living on the planet. And so we could be seeing something similar at this time for the Natan people, that they like had a spaceship that became the center of their civilization, and something about that spaceship.
Yeah, I mean, it's made out of like a magical metal or
magical
whatever.
metal, yeah.
I will say this is slightly less likely because of the timeline, because this would have been thousands of years ago and space travel does not currently really exist in the Cosmere. Could it be time travel? Did someone come from the future in a spaceship? I don't know. There are some ideas.
As much as I want all of the Cosmere to become a time travel story,
I know you do.
I actually don't want that. I don't think it would be good for us, because it would just turn one of my obsessions that remains outside of this podcast, and it would become the same thing.
This is the first time I've ever heard you argue against time travel.
I do it for the people, I do it for the fans, and I do it for the health of my marriage.
So there's one thought that I have. I have a couple of other thoughts. Maybe the Natan people were also like specially created by Heralds And again, we're given some type of like divine magical protection that shields them from Honor's vision, seemingly all shards' vision. Again, no evidence, just a thought.
Oh, if we're going no evidence, just vibes, then let me throw out a theory that's connected to another theory that you may have already seen out there on the interwebs. It gained some popularity in the immediate aftermath to Wind and Truth, and it involves the question of where is Valor. Valor,
Okay.
one of the shards, is mentioned as not being seen
Yeah.
by Odium when he is like being trained by cultivation in one of the early interludes.
Mhm.
Says he looks up into the Cosmere and he sees everyone except for the one shard who is always hiding and Valor. And it was like, where is Valor? What's Valor doing?
Yeah.
Someone speculated, and I don't have the name in front of me, I'm sorry, but they laid out this theory that the reason that Valor could not be seen is because cultivation very astutely guided Odium's eyes up into the Cosmere, and Valor is not in the rest of the Cosmere. The theory states that Valor is already on Roshar, waiting for a
interesting.
moment to strike, waiting for a moment when honor fails completely, waiting for the moment when Valor can finish Odium. Cultivation knows that and is trying to hide Valor's presence on Roshar by distracting Odium and be like, look into the greater
Okay,
Cosmere.
yeah.
Here's the theory now connected to the fourth moon. What if the fourth moon, the metal that is hidden within Roshar and hides its people, is Valor? Valor's essence hidden within Roshar, protecting Valor's people. That Amians, the human Amian hybrids, are Valor's people. The Natan people, Valor's.
At least half Valor's.
Exactly. I don't know when the merging of those people came together, but basically, yes, she is protecting her people, and that is why Honor is not able to see it and why Odium is not able to see it.
Okay, that's interesting.
It requires the belief that Valor has been hidden on
Right.
Roshar
Yeah,
this
yeah,
entire
yeah.
time. But if there is something about the fourth moon that eluded Honor, and we assume cultivation, and we definitely know Odium, all of them did not understand the fourth moon.
Yeah, because then this also brings up my question of, does Honor know that Amians are on Roshar? Because again, he doesn't really mention this group of beings at all, and they must have been there if we go with the theory that Natans are human Amian hybrids. So did he he seems like he doesn't know a lot.
Well, yeah, as a bad dad example that we have, it would definitely be a case of,
maybe if you were on Roshar this whole time paying attention to the kids you said you wanted, you would know, bro.
I think he is probably unaware of their existence.
Yeah, because they seem to be hiding from kind of everyone. You know, the Amians have their own plans behind the scenes, their own shenanigans.
But they also have a fully functioning civilization. It's not just like one city. It's around, like the whole Shattered Plains, we could assume had like smaller cities and little suburbs. And
well, the Natan, yes, are on the Shattered Plains, but the Amians theoretically are living in Amia.
Of
so
course.
Again, a whole other society that theoretically, I guess, Honor would just not know about.
Yeah,
He's just
I apologize.
I can't see this island.
I'm doing a little bit of both. But Amia is actually still shrouded, right? Shrouded in a
Probably
fog.
not in history at this point. Like, probably not during the shattering of the plains.
Maybe, but like it is now. The scouring of Amia could have been the instance of like the fog being placed on it.
Yes, that I think is correct, but I'm pretty sure that happens like within human memory. Because at some point they know that people are going to Amia, they know that there are soul casters and like magic devices there.
That's
like,
why, to me, I think it is an example of their civilization that they're interacting with other civilizations. I think the Amians were interacting from their island, and I think it makes sense that the Natan people from Stormsea were interacting with other people.
Yes. Okay, so then this was my next question, and they talk a little bit more about this in that as you said at the very beginning, there's a capital city here in the Shattered Plains that is vaporized by this clash. And so then I had the question, what, like, were the Natan people hidden and unknown not only from Honor but from everyone on Roshar, or did they have a relationship with the other mortal beings on the planet? Because there's also Urithiru at some point that has oath gates, and one of those oath gates goes to Stormseat, right? Goes to the Shattered Plains. So whoever made Urithiru knew that they needed a gate there, knew that there was a city there, probably knew that there were people there and had a relationship with them. So I asked you to hit up the spreadsheet and tell me when the relationship, or like when in time, did the planes shatter versus when Urithiru was built.
Yes, and from Jafu's timeline, we have Urithiru being built with definitely some plus or minuses around it. It's not an exact date. The shattering of the planes, much more exact. But somewhere around 5,900 to 6,000 years ago, there is the creation of the Tower of Urithiru. We debated maybe not the spren that
right
is but the building.
Yeah.
The building is created for about 1,500 years until 4,542 years ago. The tower is in existence. The planes are in existence. Stormseat is in existence. And then Honor and Odium clash and destroy Stormseat.
So there is a period of time where a fully functioning capital city of Natan people exists, and most likely, like 99.9% likely, the other mortals on Earth know about them and have some kind of relationship with them.
I would say that the Oathgate is all of the evidence that we need, that this is one of the most important cities on Roshar, that everybody knows about this
except
city.
for Honor.
Except for Honor. Exactly. I think that with the creation of the Tower of Urithiru, after that we have Noadon and his journey, but his entire culture and civilization, everything that becomes the Book of the Way of Kings, that goes on. The founding of the Knights Radiant goes on. Their rise in popularity, bonding the Spren, all of that happens. And I think it would be impossible for the city of Stormseat to be unknown to the other mortal people.
Right.
While all of this is happening.
Yeah. So that was my question, was like, are they completely hidden, or is this just something Honor doesn't know? And it seems it is something that just Honor and or maybe all of the shards are on the outs about, but the mortals are all aware of this society.
And when Honor and Odium clash, we have this, quote, most importantly, the power here and the bits of fallen sky had somehow been involved in the destruction of a city and a people, end quote. This is why we're obsessed. This is why we are so focused. It's not just that there was a city here that maybe Honor didn't know about. It's not only that that city was one of the Silver Kingdoms and connected by an oath gate. It's not only that that city eventually becomes Narak in the center of the Shattered Plains. It's because the bits of fallen sky were somehow involved in the destruction, somehow amplified the destruction in a way that Honor did not anticipate or understand. Even if he could comprehend the damage that would have come from clashing with Odium, there is another aspect of it.
Yeah. It's not just the clash that has caused this destruction. There is another force acting in relationship with that clash that creates the outcome that we see. And this is something we start to get information about from Venli and Venli's conversations with the stone, as she is trying to find out why the chasm fiends come to this specific place to pupate. And the stones are telling her that there are two different power sources essentially here. But I want to go through a quote of Venli talking to the stones that makes all of this even more complicated. Will you read this with me?
Of course.
Quote, the Radiant Bond had organized and structured the powers, something something about using the powers without that structure had been dangerous.
Because of the new gods, the stones thought with sorrow. They didn't understand. No one understood the alien stones at the place's heart.
Alien stones?
The fourth moon, now dead, now fallen, with stone that is not quite stone. And when gods came here,
stone went haywire, vibrating at insane speed. She saw people sink into it. She saw destruction, terror, end quote.
Now this is where we come back to cymatics and return to Capsule.
Yeah.
Long, long ago, we were taught that on a metal plate, when pouring some sand and then with a tuning rod, or now with, electrical current, you can make that plate vibrate, and certain tones will...
Right. Different frequencies will make different shapes.
With the sand. Exactly. And I think that's exactly what we experienced on this chaotic day. It's why the stones describe the land itself going haywire and vibrating at an insane speed. So it's the rocks that are like the sand.
Yes.
And the city of Stormseed is like the sand, and it's being forced into a new position.
And this is very interesting, but it is not the most interesting thing that I take from this quote.
What's the most interesting thing?
Because the stones are also connecting these alien stones with radiant powers. That there's something about the stones and the fact that no one understands the stones that makes surge binding on Roshar dangerous without a radiant bond.
Explain more about what you mean. What are you seeing?
Well, this quote starts with Venli hearing from the stones, or sort of like feeling through her bond with the stones, that there had been something dangerous about using powers.
Sure.
And the radiant bond is structuring and organizing those powers to make it safer.
Very similar to what we talked about in previous episodes.
Yeah.
With unchained bondsmiths or unchained radiance, and then the structures and the rules that are put upon them.
Yeah. And then the stones say that the danger is because of new gods, and because the new gods don't understand the stones. What does that mean? Like, how are these stones, or the power that is coming from the moon, related to radiant powers? My brain is broken. I don't know.
Okay, I got you. Okay, now this makes sense. I think that this is all connected to the powers of Roshar that we've been returning to and talking about so much.
Is this the fancy Heralds powers?
Yes.
Not the regular ones, but the special ones that they tap into sometimes?
Because they have their powers from their shard blades. They have radiant powers. Those are structured. Those are formatted. Those are given rules by honor.
They only have the 2 surges that their blade gives them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they have what Taln and Ash use in Wind and Truth, which is not their radiant powers. It's something else. And we've just been calling that the powers of Roshar. I think what the stones are saying is that nobody understands the powers of Roshar, including these new gods.
Mm-hmm.
That's evidence because Honor says, I don't understand it.
Yes.
And I don't want to ask anybody because it's embarrassing that I don't understand it. Yeah, exactly. So he doesn't understand it. He knows that he doesn't understand it. The stones know that they don't understand it. But something is happening with these powers of Roshar. And I think the way maybe that the fourth moon connects is that the fourth moon is a amplifier or an extra resonant point. It's like a subwoofer that has been installed in the 16-year-old's hatchback, not great car, it's not cool, but they have this just massive subwoofer that's in the back. And when the bass drops, it drops hard. And on Roshar, when the bass drops, it drops hard because they have a subwoofer. The subwoofer being the fourth moon in this instance. And the stones kind of know that because they are the box around the subwoofer.
Yeah. So you think that the moon is sort of amplifying or creating a resonance point with the surge binding powers that sort of already exist via the shards?
Because normally we would call a resonance point between the 2 different surges. That's how we've previously defined a resonance point. But if there is another thing, there's so many other things because there's also Voidlight and Odium. But if there's another thing called the powers of Roshar that theoretically anyone, not just a Radiant, but, theoretically anybody can tap into the powers of Roshar if they're aligned with the powers of Roshar. Maybe that's close to what the singers are doing naturally. They're aligning themselves in some way with the powers of Roshar to help the change of their forms.
That seems different.
It seems different, yes. But I'm saying, like, in the same way that all singers can do something unique in changing forms.
I guess I'm just wondering if it's doing something else, like if this body is allowing access to different sets of powers, that it's not just amplifying the existing things, but it's actually adding something else to the system.
Yes, I would think that these powers of Roshar are in no way limited to the radiant surges. And we know that on Ashen, the same heralds had different powers. They didn't have the exact same abilities that lined up with...
because they had unfettered access.
Exactly. Powers of Roshar is also unfettered. And the fourth moon may be acting as an amplifier of Roshar's natural power. And so the powers of Roshar can be anything for anyone as long as you align.
I think that the fourth moon would be doing more than amplifying. That it would be like also having awakening on Roshar.
I could see that if the theory about Valor is true, and that it's like an off-world thing that has come to the Rosharan system.
Because they are called, like in this quote, they're being called alien stones. And my question is, alien can mean so many different things. Does alien in this context mean that it's not originally from the planet Roshar?
Because it's the stone talking.
From a moon?
Yeah.
You know, that is a separate body. Someone from the moon coming to Earth would be considered an alien. Or is it alien as in like a completely different planetary system, which is also an alien, but kind of a different tier of alien?
It certainly is a different tier of alien. I would think to the stones of Roshar, anything that is not the stones of Roshar is alien.
Is alien, right. So it could be either one, and we don't really know how alien is alien, actually. Then, just to add another layer on this cake that is already like 20 layers deep, there's also an element of metal to this moon. There is metal existing in these alien stones in some way. Quote, that was not aluminum. It was something greater, something that responded to our clash, the ground liquefying in a pattern dictated by the tone and the strange nature of the place. End quote. What is this metal? Is it Adenalzimium?
I like how his name is already Adenalzium.
Metal?
Yeah.
I know. Trust me, I stared into the middle distance for many minutes thinking about, is Adenalzium actually just the name of the metal?
Instead of the vessel? Yeah.
Yeah.
I always like giving him the short Ado. His name is Ado. That's the vessel.
Oh.
And then all of the rest is the suffixes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that the name Adenalzium comes from an old, I believe, Jewish name for God, Adonai.
I think you're correct about that.
Yeah, so maybe his name is Adonai, and then...
So in Wind and Truth, we specifically have this connection to cymatics, that there is a metal, not a plate in this instance, but the metal of the fourth moon that is vibrating as Honor and Odium are clashing, and the vibration causes all of the stone to liquefy.
And the tone that is created by their clash.
Right. So to use another metaphor, I think Honor and Odium are the opera singer, and they begin to clash, and that releases a tone. It is a tone that resonates at the exact appropriate frequency as the metal that is the fourth moon within Roshar, just like a glass can resonate at the opera singer's voice until it shatters.
Well,
and so that's what I think is happening, is basically the metal itself is resonating incredibly violently as Honor and Odium clash.
Yeah.
And that eventually it breaks in the worst earthquake imaginable, the shattered plains. And there is a tone, because it's the tone that links the two, the forces, the shards that are clashing, and the fourth moon itself.
Yeah. I don't think that the metal, the moon itself, would need to be like aligned in tone, because on cymatics, I think you can use kind of any metal plate, right? And it more has to do with the note or the vibration that you use to create the pattern.
I'm guessing that what we're going to talk about a little bit later, and what you mentioned earlier regarding Venli, is that there is still a tone coming from the fourth moon up until this day.
Yeah, I guess like is the tone coming from the moon, or is the tone coming from the clash, or both?
I think there is a resonance that is happening within the fourth moon itself.
Yeah,
because
so
it is
moon's
powered.
already vibrating.
Exactly.
Sort of.
Yeah, no, it's already vibrating. Everything's vibrating because we're all just atoms smashing into one another. But yes, the fourth moon is vibrating because it's some type of well of power.
And then there's also the clash.
And the clash has the same vibration so that the two link up, that all their atoms start pointing in the same direction, basically. And then that creates a massive dump of power that in this Cosmere form is Investiture. And so like there's Investiture passing back and forth between the shards, the fourth moon, and it restructures the shattered planes in the exact same way that a stone ward or a will shaper would operate with the stone. They are vibrating at a frequency. The stones are vibrating at a frequency. And then there's a liquefaction that happens to change up the stone.
I mean, maybe similarities. I don't know if it's exactly the same. But yeah, so we get the shattered planes, and then we know that these shattered planes also have a role in definitely the first collision of the High Storm and the Everstorm, but also maybe just the high storms in general. We hear this, I believe this is also from Venli, quote, "A theory. The meeting of storm and storm had never again been so violent as it had been that first time when plateaus had been destroyed. Was that another clue? Had this location caused the violence of that convergence? Were others weaker because they happened elsewhere?" End quote.
I would think absolutely.
Seemingly, yes.
Yeah,
because there's this other power source impacting what's happening above it.
Yeah, we think the clash is what's happening above between the two storms.
Yeah.
But it's actually the three-way exchange of power that is making everything so violent.
How is no one else able to sense power that's just like emanating out of the ground?
Well,
in the shattered plane.
Someone's able to sense it.
Only the Chasm Fiends and Venli.
The Chasm Friends. The Chasm Friends are able to sense it.
Okay.
Because it's part of their biology and their bonds with Roshar. And this is why I keep it closer to the amplification concept, because I think the Chasm Fiends and their Spren are noting specifically the energy source, the investiture that is coming out of this fourth moon.
Yeah, it's obviously producing some type of investiture. We hear that the way that the Chasm Fiends find their way to this specific location, their preferred pupation location, is, quote, "It followed a song, 1,000 powerful song, sung by fragments of light in the ground. There, within its cocoon, power, flooding it, expanding it, power coming from the sky and from the ground," end quote.
Now, this is where things get confusing, and I might have to pitch one more time that if you want the full-blown crazy theory that I have regarding this, you might need to go over and get some drunk history on. But I think that this concept of investiture in the sky and in the ground, that it's not only a source of investiture like a well of power. There's something still calling the power out of the ground. It is a movement of energy.
You think that the power is being pulled up?
Maybe pulled is not the correct word, but yeah, I think that there is something leaving Roshar, moving from Roshar, and maybe moving back to Roshar.
Yeah,
and the major thing that we know is moving from Roshar to somewhere else is the pathway to Braze.
Yeah.
We know that it said
sense.
souls are moving, souls which are investiture,
yes,
are moving, and it's that pathway that the Heralds use when they are locked in damnation. They move on that pathway, and we assume that there's something about that pathway that allows the transition back for the fused during a desolation.
Yeah, it's not really clear what the mechanism there is, and if there is like a literal pathway that people are traveling.
Exactly.
My thought when I read this was it sounds a whole lot like Canticle in the way that the core of Canticle is sucking in Investiture.
And it's amplifying. Very important that the core of Canticle is necessary to amplify the eventual amount of investiture you get within a sun heart. It is not only that there is investiture coming from the sun.
Right.
That is true.
Yeah.
But it is then a person who is from Canticle, a Canticle person, in between the power of the sun, the power of the core, and then there is an amplification that occurs. Only when those circumstances are met. If you swap in a random person from Scadrial, they're not going to get any type of amplification in their sun heart, or at least not as powerful.
Well, they won't even turn into a sun heart, right?
I don't know if someone from Scadrial has been burnt up and examined in that instance, but they certainly said within the Sunlit Man that outsiders do not create as powerful of sun hearts.
I got to go back to our episode. I remember that being a good one. Yeah, so that was my thought, is it sounds a little bit like that. So then my thought was this some kind of planetary machine created by Adonalsium specifically? Like, did Adonalsium embed this quote unquote fourth moon into the planet specifically for this movement of investiture type thing?
Is it part of the grand apparatus?
Well, is it something similar to the grand apparatus? I mean, it could be the grand apparatus.
It's a more grand apparatus.
Know.
Yeah.
We don't know. This could be it. We could be looking at it.
The grand apparatus could be of Adonalsium. It could be the whole plan that we are now witnessing play out. We don't know what the grand apparatus is. But yeah, Adonalsium could have sat back and be like, I'm going to do this thing, and then all of this other stuff is going to happen afterward that's eventually going to lead to what I want down the road, the results of the grand apparatus.
Because nobody knows anything.
I feel like
I have one more quote just to highlight this. Quote, "Pieces of the sky fallen here, watched over by strange people, secrets even the gods didn't understand," end quote. I do think that this answers my question that when we say pieces of the sky, we're talking about the moon, the
rather than the people,
because it says pieces of the sky being watched over by the strange people.
But it is important that I think it's important that in our earlier quote, we heard that it was coming from thousands of different sources. It was a song sung by thousands of fragments of light. And so it's not only just a couple of big pieces, and it's certainly not one instance of metal, whatever it is we're talking about, a fragment upon fragment upon fragment. And then within that fragment, maybe that is why there is an ever-present resonant tone, because those fragments are singing to one another.
Yeah, like, and then why is it singing? Like, is this the origin of the songs of Roshar? Is this what the singers are like tapping into? Is this what makes Roshar the planet of music and math as we hear? Or is it something external that, you know, collided with Roshar or came into Roshar at some point? Or is this the way that Adonalsium intended it and like made it this way on purpose? I don't know.
Well, I think something that was said in Wind and Truth that is certainly going to stay with me is the concept of this is Roshar and here everything is alive, leads me to believe that regardless of what the fourth moon was prior to its arrival on Roshar, once it arrived on Roshar, it was going to go through a process that ended in its singing, because everything does on Roshar. Like there is nothing that will be on Roshar that isn't going to start finding its vibration, finding its tone, finding its rhythm. And the more conscious or the more sapient that you are, the more control something like a shard power or pieces of a shard, splinters of a shard, certainly would have enough investiture to dictate that they start to develop a, if not straight consciousness, then at least an awareness of the other slivers, the other splinters that are around. And I think, yeah, when you're aligned with Roshar, you're going to be a great singer. That's just the way it is.
Maybe this is the thing that makes Roshar Roshar.
That, I think, is one step too far. I don't think that this thing...
The tables are turned.
It's always described as alien and not of Roshar.
Okay, that's true.
And I think that Roshar does have something that predates everything else about music. And we have an interview episode coming up this month all about music theory and how it relates to Roshar. I think it's going to be a lot of fun and was part of the reason why we wanted to talk about the fourth moon, because they're interrelated. But I think, yes, the musical nature of Roshar predates the fourth moon.
Yeah. And then the moon just comes and sings along.
Yeah, it hears a song. It hears the songs of Roshar. It feels the powers of Roshar.
Now I'm just imagining a bunch of little pieces of metal like It's a Small World at Disneyland, just like singing inside the planet. Like if you listen really close, you can just hear a bunch of tiny little voices embedded in the planet singing, "It's a small world after all."
And they just find that harmony and they all start singing together. And when you sing good enough, you vibrate investiture out so that the chasm fiends know to come pupate, because it will be attracting the appropriate spren, which will bond with them and give them the investiture necessary to grow and like pupate at the next size. I think what is really important to remember after all of this talking about the fourth moon, is it's not the only thing that's here.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's
not even the only thing.
There's also a perpendicularity.
Yes.
And here's where we don't know if we've just done an hour and 15 minutes on a completely nonsensical concept, because what if it's just all the well of control?
No, it's not.
All Odium's stuff. He's the alien. He doesn't belong. The Natan people are just another example of like outsiders that came with Odium. And none of this is anything other than Odium's metal, Racium, and the well of control. And Honor didn't know that it existed because he was in a fight with Odium, that Odium was hiding from him all of this stuff.
No.
Tell me why it's wrong. Now, for the record, I don't think that this is the case, but tell me why that's an incorrect theory, an incorrect look, because the well of control is also here.
The well of control is also there, but they are different. They're different things, but I do think that the reason no one has been able to find Odium's perpendicularity is because it's in this location, and this shielding, blocking, hiding situation is happening in this particular area.
Oh, you think it's still in effect?
Yeah, I do.
Interesting. Okay.
Because, and we'll get to this, well, we can get to it right now. No one else can hear what Venli can hear in order to locate this spot. This location is said to have a, quote, discordant tone and chaotic rhythm, end quote, that only Venli and the chasm fiends are able to hear. The heavenly ones are not able to hear it. I don't think that any of the other regular listeners are able to hear it. So it's not just a void spren thing. It's not just a singer listener thing.
And therefore, that's why Timber thinks that it is because of the spren of Odium and the spren of Honor. And I would also add Venli's nature as a native of Roshar. I think it's those three things in connection that allows Venli the ability to hear this sound.
Yeah, seemingly it's because of the fact that she has two spren, and then like you said, she's a listener who naturally has the ability to hear the rhythms of Roshar in a more explicit way than maybe humans can now. And Venli even wonders, quote, had Odium somehow masked his pool using Honor, or was it something else, end quote.
And we would be speculating it is something else. It's the fourth moon.
I think that it's something else. I wonder if Odium knew that it had these hiding properties and so purposefully chose to put his pool here, because I'm pretty sure it is said in a couple of places in Wind and Truth that Odium specifically was trying to hide his well of power because he had people like Mishram trying to take it. He had people like Ishar trying to like everyone's up in his pool, and I think he was like, okay, let me put this somewhere where I'm not gonna have people, you know, traipsing through my pool all the time, taking my power.
I don't think that we've seen any unprotected or unhidden wells at this point across the Cosmere.
I mean, the high storm.
If you count that as it's a very well protected.
It's just like,
well.
hello, I'm here.
I think it's normal to want to hide those sources of power, but I also want us to recognize how quickly this event, this shattering of the planes and destruction of the city of Stormseed, also has devastating consequences for the Heralds, the Radiants, and eventually all of the characters that we know and love throughout the Stormlight archive, because it is only going to be a single generation after the destruction of Stormseed that we have Aharietiam. 50 to 100 years after the destruction of Stormseed is the dissolution of the Oathpact, the Heralds giving up. There's one desolation in between, and the last desolation ends so fast after this destruction. And then, of course, the Radiants will fall shortly thereafter, and there will be the false desolation that they'll have to contend with. But this clash between Odium and Honor really is setting up the destruction of the Oathpact itself.
It's the beginning of the end, seemingly. Like it's a very obvious show of the way that things are disintegrating, the way that Honor is struggling and kind of falling apart, and the way that things are starting to change. It's a little bit of a turning point, not explicitly, but sort of symbolically, that at this point, things are shifting, things are breaking.
And you would have to imagine that these heralds, who have been fighting for thousands of years at this point, and have been alive for thousands of years, have been experiencing the threads of their mind and the threads of their bond all falling apart. They're witnessing horrific wars over and over again. And then the most destructive thing since the destruction of their planet occurs, they're not going in a positive direction. Like they just got the closest thing to the destruction of Ashen that they had seen since the destruction of Ashen. Like the high point was somewhere years ago when there were just wars. Like now they are at an even worse point. So their failure is evident.
They never really reference this event. Like, we don't hear from the Heralds what they think about the shattering of the planes. You would think that people would at least feel an earthquake, you know, many miles away, but we don't really hear their thoughts about it. But we do know that they're struggling. But before we get into Aharietiam, I think we need to go back a little bit and catch up with the Heralds, because the last time we left off with them, they had just made the Oathpact and become Heralds, and they were like, we're gonna do it. We're gonna fight Odium's forces. Great idea. In practice, it's pretty terrible for them. I think it is safe to say. They spend however many thousands of years that these desolations are going on constantly, either at battle or being tortured. Like, they do not have a break, period. They are often waiting for a large battle to happen where lots of fused have died to make the decision to go back to Braze and start what they call an isolation, where they're isolating the fused away from Roshar. Quote, if one of them died and remained on Braze, that slowed the fused. The more who did, the slower the enemy returned. So to win a desolation, they trained the humans, they killed as many fused as possible, and they began staying in damnation, reforging the lock, until one of them broke in torture and the floodgates opened again, letting the fused begin the process to return to Roshar. At that point, the Heralds, exhausted, would return, starting the cycle once more. End quote. I mean, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty bad.
And they do this for just about 2,500 years. Oof. Between Oathpact being created and Aharietiam, they have 2,500 years of this sequence over and over and over again. Each of them, with the exception of Taln, is the first to break.
At some point, yeah.
At some point during this time. So each of them starts a desolation, with the exception of Taln. And by the end, I do not think that there is a gap of more than a year.
Yeah, they start getting so close together because the Heralds are unable to withstand the torture any longer. And I think it is worth sort of pausing on like the mechanics of the Oathpact here. One, because eventually we're going to talk about the new Oathpact and how it's different. And two, because I recently got a question from a coworker specifically about like, wait, how is this working? And it is kind of complicated. So I think it's worth sort of pausing and talking about how exactly this is working. Let's just start with a quote. Quote, "We form a binding through our willpower, holding the others we are connected to. Are replacements, in a way, to Braze. Impossible, save for the strange nature of that planet, lending our oaths a multiplicative strength," end quote. So the Heralds, via the Oathpact, are sort of acting as this lock, trapping the fused, who are souls, on Braze. This is only possible because Braze is also attracting the fused to it. So it's giving some help to the Heralds in that way. Each Herald can die separately and go to Braze whenever they die, or if they don't die, they just go back by choice to be part of the lock. But if any one Herald breaks under torture and leaves Braze to go back to Roshar, they all go back to Roshar.
I think the word multiplicative is the word I'd like to call out.
Yeah.
Because as we were discussing, the fourth moon perhaps being an amplifier or a multiplier, as we see on Canticle, that there's some element of increasing the amount of energy you get out from the energy that you put in. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah.
The Heralds are themselves giving up energy, but there is actually a multiplier effect going on that allows their bonds and this lock to be stronger than just what they are capable of producing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like if you are pushing someone away from you, right? And like they're pushing back, they're trying to come at you. That's going to be a lot easier if there's also another person on the other side pulling the person away from you as you are pushing them.
Exactly. I think that might be an indication that the flow of investiture is stronger going to Braze. Like a river that the fused are forced to fight against, that would always be challenging, always be slightly more challenging.
Yeah.
And then the Heralds are standing at the narrowest point of the river like a lock. And so it's not only their sacrifice and their will and their effort, it's also something potentially about this flow, and that might be happening because of the fourth moon, or at least it might be multiplied by the fourth moon.
Okay. I'm not totally on board with that, but it does make sense in certain ways. Okay, now that we've kind of established the Oathpact and what exactly the Heralds have been doing for the last 2,000 plus years, they are pretty tired and worn down, and even Honor starts to realize that the Heralds are struggling.
He says, quote, "I hadn't noticed what immortality was doing to them. Not just immortality. There was more. My power. They could not hold so much of my power." End quote. And to continue this going, can you read the other quote that Honor has?
Yeah, because he also has some specific observations about how each of the Heralds is faring under this pressure. Quote, "How they hurt. Dear Chana was falling apart. Nail had become so rigid. Yezrian hated himself. Videl became indifferent. Batar so cruel. Ishar, who was explaining his plan and looking for validation, hid it best. But the same hurt was there, manifesting as a need to control," end quote. Which is basically how we meet all of these Heralds. This is the beginning of their magical maladies.
And I think there is something interesting here connected to this concept of cognitive shadows that we've been speaking about for so long and so obsessed with before we got the fourth moon to be newly obsessed with. The Heralds are cognitive shadows. Cognitive shadows are in a way influenced by the thoughts and the cognitive energy that surrounds that being. The Heralds are a little bit more together than maybe other examples of cognitive shadows. But that is made worse because they have way more power than other cognitive shadows. And power wants to become alive. In the Cosmere, power always wants to become alive. They are wells of Honor's power that wants to be a herald, that wants to be the heralds as we see them in their quote unquote best. But then the actual thing that's left, not the power, but the mind of these heralds, it starts to reject what the power wants or like go in the opposite direction because it's not all working together in my understanding of the circumstance. And basically they start to break in the exact opposite way of what their quote unquote like highest ideal self would be. They become the opposite. Why do they become the opposite? I think that's because there's like another force that's kind of competing in a similar way to how we talk about the shards dealing with the vessel and the power itself. They're mini versions of that.
Maybe. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. I think I'm like hesitant in terms of how much of this is magical and how much of it is very human. I think during times of trial and struggle, we all kind of have our own particular fulcrum on which we break, our unique idiosyncratic sort of weakness in our personality that turns when we're upset or again, like in times of stress, right? That maybe some of us are more likely to become indifferent or more likely to turn to self-hatred, etc. So I'm sure that it's a little of both, that there's like something magical happening. Obviously, Honor says that it's partially due to having too much power. But we also then know, per word of Brandon, that some of this is just a function of how long these people have been around.
Yeah, and the torture is working. The torture and the time is working.
Yeah, plus torture.
Exactly.
There's so much going on.
And the torture aspect that would be impacting them regardless of what else is made worse because it's over time. And then maybe it is also magnified by the power that they are holding, which they are not capable of holding as much power as they are being given because they are still mortal entities that are just being dumped with so much power. And Honor says this multiple times. He's like, I'm going to give them more power and I'm going to give them more rules. I'm going to give them more power and more rules. And he may have overflowed all of his cups and just given them too much power.
Yeah.
And then you have purposeful torture by a master of torture who knows exactly where your fulcrum is, where you're going to break, and maybe then is saying kind of like over and over, Ishar, here is all of your weaknesses. And after enough time and after that much torture, you're going to believe that about yourself. You're going to become that thing because the torture is working.
Yeah. And so at this point, the heralds ask Honor for help. Like things have gotten bad enough that they're honest about not being able to do this anymore. They come to him and they ask to modify the Oathpact to give them a little bit of relief, a little bit of a break. Ishar says, quote, "We need you to change the bond. Take it from us."
Break the Oathpact? Honor asked.
Change it so that others can take our place, Ishar said. Or maybe make it allow half of us to hold the bond for one isolation and then trade with the other half.
5, Honor said. No, impossible. 5 is a number of weakness. No symmetry, no power. Perhaps 4 would work, the number of Adonalsium's 4 aspects, or 10, 16, 1, end quote. And we know why those numbers are significant. Honor knows why those numbers are significant, but importantly, I don't think he really explains well why those numbers are important because Honor's breaking. That's what I've been saying since our very first episode. Honor shows up in a system where he agreed to be alone and then was immediately not alone. The man is already breaking at the very beginning of this story.
What more do you think should have been explained? I feel like he does kind of explain.
I feel like he is thinking about how to explain, but he doesn't vocalize it. Maybe similar to someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's, they are aware that like there is some link there's some way to understand and like make an establishment, but it's not clear to the people listening why those things are important.
Well, he says 5 is weak because it doesn't have symmetry, but 4 could work because of Adonalzium's 4 aspects. 10 is obviously Honor's number, which I think they already know. Like there's 10 heralds.
Yeah, and he's just like 16, 1. Like I feel like he's overwhelmed by the suggestion that they're going to break the Oathpact.
I mean, I think he's just giving options. He's like, there are options, but 5 isn't one of them.
Potentially, I guess it comes back to like, how do you view Honor? And in Wind and Truth, I view Honor as a consistently breaking person until he's eventually completely eliminated at the end of Wind and Truth.
Obviously, they decide to go with 1 because they're already in a situation where Taln is on Braze and the rest of them are not. So they go with 1. Honor does tell them up front that this is going to be considered a cracking of the Oathpact. That it's not that they can do this and have no consequences. Like there will be some type of breaking here, but it's possible. And then he says, quote, there must yet be 10 to hold the core. But one could stand at the forefront, like a soldier in the lead of a formation, end quote.
So I think this is, again, Honor basically creating something on the fly that is going to be an aspect of everybody's destruction. Is like he's panicking. All of his greatest soldiers and demigods that he made are all falling apart. It's his fault that they're all falling apart. He's been a bad dad. He's recognized the terrible things that he's done to his children. They're all coming to him, broken and just like, we can't do this anymore. And he knows that the breaking of the Oathpact is a weakness that is exploitable. And so then he's like, yeah, 1 can do it. They'll stand at the head of the formation, but 1 can't do it forever.
Right.
And they all know and recognize this. So they're just like delaying the inevitable. And they all kind of know that they're delaying the inevitable.
Well, I think it does serve its purpose, right? Because even when Ishar finally comes to Honor and presents this plan, he says, like, we just need a little bit of time. We just need a break. It doesn't need to be forever. We just need some kind of stopgap to like catch our breath, to regroup. And that is what they get, right?
Yes.
So like they both know and kind of intended for this to not be permanent.
Right. And the gap in time between when they actually get the break that they're talking about is far too long because Honor doesn't do a good job, unlike Kaladin, who figures out that what they need is a real break. They don't get a real break. They're still holding the core. They're still holding. Ishar's doing that thing when he's like linked to everyone and siphoning their pain, but maybe he's also like moving it around between all of them in a way that's not healing, which is what Kaladin eventually wants to do, is give them time to heal rather than just endure and survive a little bit longer.
So Ishar presents this plan and then he kind of immediately tells all of the other heralds, look, I'm going to keep searching for a solution. I'm going to keep looking for a way to switch us out, to like get some subs, put me in, coach.
Yeah. Let someone else be the leader at the front of the formation.
Let someone be all 10 of us, not just the leader, but like we're gonna
the full sub.
Yeah,
yes,
full sub, whole team.
Yeah, exactly. Bring on the B team, like the A team's going out, and we're just swapping in the full next team.
Get the second string in.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, I'm gonna keep thinking about this and troubleshooting how we're gonna fix this, right? So like this problem has been theoretically being worked on the whole time because Honor also at this point is like, Oathpact is done and actually I'm out. He says, quote, I will no longer be aiding you as you go forward, heralds. My part in this conflict is done, end quote. And then almost immediately after that, he says, quote, I cannot afford to care any longer. I can't afford to care about any of you. I need distance. Yes, end quote. And he goes off and he has like a midlife crisis and he goes to the storm and he's just like emo boy crying. And then he goes to Shinovar and he just like lays in the grass and is like, wah, wah, poor me. I've ruined everything. But this is not a story about Honor. This is a story about the Heralds.
Who I think are only on the bad receiving end.
Of course.
And I definitely point all of the problems at the Heralds. Honor leaving in this instance after the clash and the destruction of the Shattered Plains after the recognition that there really is no end to this conflict. Like, he couldn't beat Odium. He wasn't willing to sacrifice enough to actually win. And so he can see the future. He can see the future pretty good, at least. And he's just looking down and is just like, nah, it's real bad. I'm going to give up.
Yes. Not only has he failed, but he recognizes that he is the cause of so much suffering.
Yeah, he says this, quote, "Finally, I acknowledged that something inside of me was unraveling and had been for a long time. The ailment striking the Heralds was in part my doing. I had shared too much of myself with them, and I was slowly losing myself," end quote. To me, this is the difference between just a bad dad and how all of these things are mimicked on the macro scale and the micro scale. What's happening to the Heralds, their magical maladies, the effects of torture, the effects of time. It's also happening to Honor. Mm-hmm. Honor is not in alignment with his power, and I don't know if he has ever been truly in alignment with his power. He was always fraying. He was always unraveling. And the events that have occurred are just now reinforcing themselves and kind of like making themselves known to Honor. That just like, this is all your fault because you are breaking.
Well, no, it goes back even further than that. Like, all of these things are stacking on top of one another, but Honor himself goes all the way back and says that, quote, "The quiet piece of myself was becoming loud now. The piece that knew that I and the 15 others had done something terrible on Yolin," end quote. So not only is he saying like, ever since I was Honor, things have been going poorly, but he's going all the way back to say like, we made the wrong decision in shattering Adonalsium, period. Like, I never should have even been in this position.
Which is definitely why I have the concept so strongly that like all the shards are bad. It's because of this quote and because of what we learn in Wind and Truth.
Yeah.
That they messed up either in practice or in purpose. Either the purpose was messed up or the way that they did it and the way they went about it was messed up. And it was setting them up for failure from the very beginning. It's like a fruit of the poison tree. Like, you're just never going to be starting off on a good foot, and the shards weren't.
I mean, I think there's also, as you were saying, a really like micro-macro situation here. It reminds me a lot of when in Mistborn, the Lord Ruler is killed, and then suddenly the group becomes aware of all of the things that Rashek had been doing, right? All of the ways that he was holding up the world and like trying to protect the people, etc. It's really easy to point your finger at someone and be like, you're doing a bad job. And then you get the position and you're like, oh, actually, this is like really hard and you were doing a bunch of stuff that I didn't see. And we see this in a conversation that Honor has with the Wind. He is in Shinovar, again, laying in the grass, just like being a sad boy and looking at all of the pain that he's caused. And he looks out at all of the people and he says, quote, they were better off without me.
"Without what you have become," the Wind whispered, "having no god is far preferable to having a heartless one.
And a god who cares?
You killed that god."
End quote.
Devastating from the Wind.
Yeah,
oh, man.
Pretty bad.
Cutting so deep of just like, but I wanted to be the god who cares. You killed that god, Tanavast. Like, you're just a pretender. And they're all pretenders. And this one moment of destruction at the Shattered Plains has wrapped around it so much mystery that we weren't even theorizing about or speculating about before Wind and Truth. With the introduction of the fourth moon, I think we have deep connections to the rest of the Cosmere. Because I do think Alien is maybe not only a moon and not Roshar. I think that alien might mean alien from outside.
From a different system.
Exactly. But we have the people as well. And the Natan people, and eventually, as the Wind is saying, like, all of these people are capable of existing without you, you heartless god.
Well, yeah, because at first he cared too much, and then he was like, I can't care anymore. Like, I'm just messing things up with all my caring. And so he retreats.
I'm just messing things up because I care too much.
Yes. Which is true because he's incompetent. And so it's like, look, man, your heart's in the right place, but also you're kind of messing everything up. Speaking of another person who's like trying to help but actually messes everything up, Ishar. Because this is how we sort of leave the Heralds and leave the Oathpact is Ishar. Ishar does a very oldest child thing here. He's just really being a big brother and is like, oh man, now that honor is gone, like I need to step up and take care of my little group here. I need to be a leader. He says, quote, I first bore surges. I initiated the Oathpact. I am the bondsmith. I can bear some of your pain, end quote. Because it's been acknowledged through all the heralds that they struggle in again. And even though they are not going to be on Braze, things are tough. It's hard to be a herald. And so Ishar, through their Oathpact bond, takes on, sort of siphons off some of the pain of each of the other heralds while he goes about his work of finding Oathpact replacement.
Now, of course, he's wrong. He can't actually bear more of their pain, and it's going to break him and lead him to not finding any solution and instead becoming a weird psycho Odium honor Ishar
real bad
mega god that he wants to be. And there is so much from the Stormlight Archive that boils down to these concepts of you can't do it alone. Like you cannot be the only one to bear all of this power or all of this pain or to take things away. Like the answer is not to be Kaladin and like have the responsibility of saving everyone. It's not to be Shallan and like bear the sins of everybody else's actions as your own sins. Instead, there needs to be acceptance, again, on the micro level and on the macro level. And so I'm very excited to see how these heralds heal themselves, but also what the lost parts of their lives, the thousands of years that they will exist after this moment, after Aharietiam, where they're going to be struggling, they're going to be connected, they're going to still like have they haven't been released from their burdens.
Right.
And they're just like doing their burden in a worse way of sorts because they're alone and they're like all forcefully separated. They don't hang out together.
But also, unfortunately, not alone enough because they exist on a planet of other people that they are also hurting because they're hurting. And so this is where we leave the Heralds. In shame for the dishonor of abandoning the Oathpact, the Heralds leave their swords in the stone where we see them at the very beginning of the Way of Kings, and they walk off into the sunset, not in a happy way, in a sad way. The end of the Heralds and the end of this episode.
I think that does mark a great place to wrap it up. We have really only been talking about like a period of 50 to 100 years, a little bit expanded into the past just to give us some context, but we obviously have the era of solitude that comes next, the era of Taln bearing the Oathpact alone, and we are going to focus a lot on the false desolation, Ba Edo Mishram,
and the Knights Radiant.
The Knights Radiant.
Like, during this period of time that we've been talking about, there's also the Knights Radiant sort of forming and formalizing and really becoming a robust organization. And we haven't even talked about the Knights Radiant. So that's going to be next time on Cosmere Conversations. Mishram, the Knights Radiant, the Recreants. We're going to get into it.
Make sure if you would like a chance to enter a raffle, you join us over on Patreon. Anyone who joins in May and remains a patron until the first day of June when the raffle happens will be inserted. And a special thank you to all of our existing patrons, all of you listening. We appreciate it. We hope that you had a good time and learned a little something about these crazy kids we call the Heralds.
Hit us up with all of your fourth moon thoughts and theories. I'm never going to get over this. So anytime, send us an email, send us an Instagram message, let us know. And until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.